Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as a supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the President, bills brought from the House of Representatives, petitions, papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Madam President, I have the honour to lay on the table the following paper, as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended September 30, 2019. Thank you, Madam President.
Vice President.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed on the order paper in my name. The report on the Trinidad and Tobago delegation to the Caribbean stakeholder meeting ahead of the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action held in Barbados on February 10th to the 11th, 2020.
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed on the order paper in my name. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government to the 12th report of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises on an inquiry to assess the performance of the Community-Based Environmental Protection and Enhancement Program and its operation. Thank you, Madam President.
Reports from committees, urgent questions.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I expect all ministers to be here for urgent questions. I am seeing the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. So I urge you to stand down to the Minister of Public Utilities for a couple of minutes. He is here? Well, okay, well then we'll answer all three, but probably not necessarily in that order. You have
Right. Senator Mark, let's treat with question number 2. Already going. All right, Senator Mark, question number 1.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities, in light of the water distribution issue negatively impacting residents in the Penal Debe region who have been without pipe-borne water for over 21 days, can the Minister indicate what immediate measures will be taken to address this situation?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the country is now coming to the end of a very harsh dry season which negatively impacts WASA's capacity to treat and to produce water for the benefit of the citizens of this republic. Our reservoirs are very significantly below the long-term averages. For an example, the Arena reservoir is 29.43% compared to the national or the long-term average of 58.39. That kind of record is consistent across all of our reservoirs, Madam Speaker. The situation is, of course, affecting the reliability of supply to various communities, including Penal DB. Customers at the extremities of our system or on the higher levels of the country are having particular difficulty. The Penal DB area primarily gets water from the Caroni water treatment plant, and the Desalcott system, and as well the Navet water treatment plant. And there are some localized sources like Clark Road water treatment plant and Penal water treatment plant. Production at Caroni has been reduced as a result of this dry season. We had a terrible dry season last, and this one is also very dry with reductions in rainfall and storage, Madam President. For an example, between the 13th of May and the end of April and the 13th of May, production was reduced from 25 to 28 million gallons a day down to 20 to 25 million gallons a day, closer to 20 million gallons a day. A reduction of 5 to 8 million gallons a day from the Caroni wastewater treatment plant.
Minister, your time is up.
Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Madam Chair, Madam President, I beg your pardon. Can the minister indicate what steps are being taken by WASA to have water rerouted or rerouted or redistributed from areas that are now getting water 24/7 a day, so that those residents in the areas identified can at least receive some water in their taps?
First of all, it is not correct to say that the areas identified have not been without water supply. That is an exaggeration. And in terms of what is actually being done, we are attempting over the last 48 hours to increase our water production and distribution and using the truck-borne system to supplement on the extremities and the higher levels, Madam President.
Madam President, is the minister aware that residents in the community identified have been without water for over 21 days? Is the minister aware of this?
That too is grossly exaggerated. I have facts from WASA, who is responsible for distributing it, and in no case 21 days is a reality.
Next question, Senator Mark.
To the Prime Minister. In light of reports that unknown and unregistered hotel businesses in Tobago are targeted to receive portions of government's $50 million bailout, can the Prime Minister indicate whether the THA intends to review the guidelines governing the distribution of relief grants?
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the first point to be made, and I know it might be lost on some, is that the Tobago House of Assembly governs the whole of Tobago. The Tobago House of Assembly's governance structure is with respect to all of the persons in Tobago. So the Tobago House of Assembly is best suited to decide, to develop, and to distribute the policy with respect to the distribution of the $50 million that is being transferred from central government to help the hotel industry in Tobago. What has arisen is the Tobago company, set up to deal with tourism, Tobago Tourism Limited, had done an audit. They'd done an audit of an all-inclusive audit, and that is what was being used by the Tobago House of Assembly, who have the duty to deal with all persons. Who the Tobago Hoteliers Association may be dealing with is their membership alone. So this is not even a storm in a teacup. It is a non-issue, and the Tobago House of Assembly, in their normal governance structure, will decide the allocation policy of this $50 million to assist the hotel industry in Tobago.
Madam President, can the minister indicate in instances where fraud could be involved, where unregistered businesses can receive portion of this $50 million taxpayers' dollars? Can the minister advise what steps will be taken by the THA to avoid fraud in the distribution of funds by the Tobago House of Assembly?
Minister.
Madam President, there is so much supposition in there, it is a little difficult to decipher what exactly is the question. First of all, I am certain that no unregistered business would be granted any money by the Tobago House of Assembly in their governance and in their distribution of this $50 million to the hotel industry in Tobago. So if that is not going to happen, I don't understand how we then jump from there to instances of fraud. What I can say, thank God, it is a P&M Tobago House of Assembly. So the instances of that would be very, very greatly reduced, if none or minimal.
Madam President,
Senator Dylan Remy.
could the minister indicate what is the process for the allocation of these grants?
Madam President, thank you very much for that question. The process will be worked out by the Tobago House of Assembly, who is in charge of the governance structure in Tobago. They will work out the policy, the procedure, and they will be the ones in charge of distribution and allocation of these monies.
Next question, Senator Ma.
President, thank you. To the Minister of Finance. In light of Moody's recent report, which has changed the country's credit rating from stable to negative, can the minister indicate whether there are any implications for the national economy in the immediate, short, and medium-term outlook?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The question is based on a false premise. Trinidad and Tobago's credit rating has not changed. Trinidad and Tobago's credit rating remains BA1 with Moody's and BBB- with Standard & Poor's. The recent publication by Moody's related to the outlook. There's a huge difference between an outlook and a rating. Our rating with Moody's remains exactly as it was 1 year ago.
Madam President, can I ask the Honourable Minister, who seemed to be very optimistic on this negative from stable, can the Minister indicate whether the cost of borrowing on the international capital market by the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago will increase as a result of this change from stable to negative? Can I ask the Minister to clarify for us?
Minister.
Madam President, I am not optimistic. I am truthful. I want to repeat that Trinidad and Tobago's credit rating has not changed. All that has changed is the outlook, and the outlook of virtually every single country in the world that has been assessed by Moody's within the last month or two has changed to negative. And it's obvious why. We have a global pandemic called COVID-19. If you had read, if the Honorable Senator had read through you, Madam President, the actual note from Moody's, one would see that the outlook has changed from stable to negative because of the tremendous uncertainty associated with COVID-19, which is only normal. And no, we do not expect any issues with respect to the interest rate at which we borrow because of this, because our rating remains the same. It has not changed. And I don't appreciate, Madam President, when the Honorable Senator keeps pretending that our rating is now negative. Our rating is BA1.
Urgent questions has expired.
You have escaped. You have escaped. Go ahead.
Questions or notice? Questions for oral answer.
Leader, Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the government is pleased to announce that it will be answering questions number 78, question number 108 and 109. We ask for a 2-week deferral of question 110.
Question 110 is deferred for 2 weeks. Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, question number 78 to the Honorable Prime Minister.
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the payroll audit has been completed and a copy of the audit report has been circulated to honorable senators.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, can the Honorable Minister indicate some of the implications of this audit?
No, Senator Mark, that question does not arise.
Madam President, can I ask the Honorable Minister what was the sum of monies that would have been misallocated in this particular matter?
That question also does not arise, Senator Mark, based on the question that has been posed and the response received.
You didn't expect
So, Madam President,
yes,
we have been advised by the Honorable Minister, on behalf of the Prime Minister, that the audit is in our possession. Am I right?
Minister.
Madam President, I repeat, I can understand Senator Mark's discomfort at the fact that there's been complete transparency and accountability. So I will repeat for his benefit. The payroll audit has been completed and a copy of the audit report has been circulated to honorable senators.
I'll go on to the
next question, Senator Mark.
Question number, is it 108, Madam?
It is 108.
Question number 108 to the Honorable Prime Minister.
Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam President, the irony of the person asking this question with respect to the Red House should not be lost. Under the previous administration, the then Speaker of the House chaired a committee with respect to the restoration of the Red House and sent up the potential cost for the restoration astronomically, including over $300 million, close to $400 million to be spent on a companion building. Gave out a contract for well over $100 million for the restoration of a roof that was never completed. And that is the legacy of the former Speaker of the House in the previous administration in trying to restore the Red House. I am happy to say that under this administration, all contractors engaged by UDCOT on the Red House restoration project have been paid the respective contract sums, with the exception of retention sums, which will be released upon the expiration of the defects liability period for the respective contracts. And then, as at January 31st, 2020, which is when this question was dated as at, no contractors were owed. And thirdly, at present, no money is owed to any contractor. And it should be noted, Madam President, that in addition to the above, claims for variations made by contractors are currently being assessed. So the contract sums have been settled, save for retention, which is in accordance with the contract, and any variations that they were are in the process of being assessed for payment.
Well, first of all, let me remind the Honorable Minister of National Security that the former Speaker never gave out any
Senator Mark, Senator
to
Mark.
anybody. I think I need to put that
Senator
on
Mark,
the record.
Senator Mark.
Yes, I'm going to ask my question.
No, hold on. You ask a question. You're not here at this stage to be making any speeches. Yes. So ask the question, please, Senator Mark.
He made a statement.
Senator Mark,
yes.
Please take your seat. I ask you to remember at what stage of the order paper we are at, and I ask you please to conform to my rulings. Please ask your supplementary question.
Can this beleaguered minister.
No, Senator Mark. Pose
Alright,
your supplemental question and no more.
Madam President, through you, I'm guided accordingly. Can this outgoing minister,
Senator Mark, this is the second time I ask you, please put your question only to the minister.
yes, Madam President, can I ask through you if the minister can share with this honorable Senate the actual value of the claims of variation that is now being addressed by UDICOT in respect of the contractors identified on or outlined.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I understand the difficulties that Senator Mark just found himself in, hundreds of millions dissipating. So, Madam President, the answer...
Senator Mark, Minister, please, let this be the last time that I have to say anything, or we will move on to the next question. Minister, please answer the question.
Madam President, I am certain that I heard Senator Mark make a comment a short while ago calling me an old thief. And I would like that moved from the Hansard, please.
Senator Mark, please withdraw and apologize for that statement.
I withdraw at this time. I apologize at this time. But, Madam President, could you guide this gentleman, this minister, from imputing improper motive to my good name and character?
Senator Mark, in light of the fact that I'm making numerous rulings on this question, I will ask you to move on to the next question.
No problem. I will defend my good name against him.
And Senator Mark, I will ask you to move on to the next question without any more.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 109 to the Honorable Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, with regard to the investigation by retired Justice Rolson Nelson into the circumstances surrounding the award of a contract for automated passport kiosks at the PRCO in ANR and the ANR Robinson International Airport, I wish to advise as follows. The investigation has been completed. 2, the report identifies serious corporate governance issues and related issues regarding the procurement of the automated passport control kiosks. These issues are under review at this time. 3, the report with its findings has been referred to the Board of the Airport Authority and the Office of the Attorney General for legal advice on the appropriate course of action to be taken that are in the best interests of the Airport Authority and the state. And 4, the automated passport control kiosks are not operational at the airport at this time, since there are a number of legal issues that are being examined at this time. In any event, with the closure of our borders, there is no passenger traffic through our airports at this time. I thank you.
Senator Mark.
If the minister can identify some of the serious governance issues surrounding this entire award, as he outlined a short while ago.
Minister. Madam President, at this point in time, there is an ongoing investigation, and I'm unable to answer that question. However, if the member poses the question in the appropriate way, and the legal team at the ministry gives the okay, I will be able to answer the question.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, can the minister indicate whether the government has taken a decision to terminate the contract between Novo and the Airport Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, given these irregularities and governance issues identified?
Minister.
Again, there's an ongoing investigation at the Airport Authority. The Airport Authority is an authority that has the purview to sign and terminate contracts without the guidance of the government. At this point in time, the government is waiting for a report from the Airport Authority. And again, if the member poses that question through the right channels, I will be able to seek the information and submit.
Madam President, I also ask the Honourable Minister, how long does the Minister envisage this matter to last, given the importance of it, and over $300 million is involved? So can the Minister indicate whether he can share with his Parliament a time frame for concluding this very important matter?
Madam
Minister?
Speaker, again, there's an ongoing investigation. The report have been sent to the Airport Authority and the Attorney General, and the Minister is not getting involved in that aspect of the investigation. Immediately upon receiving a report from the Airport Authority, it will be laid in the Cabinet. It will move on to the Cabinet, and only then will the Minister be able to give any timeline as to the conclusion of this investigation.
Can the Minister indicate, Madam President, whether the contract or the award of that contract is intact as we speak? Can the Minister advise whether the contract between Novo and the Airport Authority of Trinidad and Tobago is fully intact?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question.
Well, Madam President.
No, that's it, Senator Mark. You've utilized all
I have
your
any further questions, ma'am?
No.
Thank you.
You're not very innocent.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 16, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the Senate for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance. That is the failure of the government to address the ongoing water shortage crisis and the dreadful impacts that it will have on the citizenry if not addressed urgently. The matter is definite because it pertains specifically to thousands of citizens from Central, South, and parts of East and North Trinidad who have been suffering due to the water shortage crisis that they have been experiencing for over 4 weeks. The matter is definite as the government has failed to take any adequate measures to bring relief to the citizens who are suffering as a result of the water shortage crisis. The matter is urgent because it is an ongoing issue which has been affecting citizens for weeks. The matter, if not addressed immediately, will bring more hardship to the affected citizens. The matter is of public importance as the failure of the government to provide an essential commodity such as water to the population will have a dire consequence. Water is essentially for sanitation and personal hygiene, which are core features in the new guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health for reopening businesses, facilities, and institutions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The failure of the government to act swiftly and competently to address the worsening situation will lead to a national water crisis with attendant social and economic turmoil. I thank you very much, Madam President.
Honourable Senators, I am not satisfied that this matter as presented qualifies under this standing order. As I have ruled in earlier matters, the threshold required has not been met to have this matter approved. I also wish to point out that this matter was dealt with as an urgent question.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
Honourable Senators, the debate on the following motion, which was in progress when the Senate adjourned on Tuesday, February the 4th, 2020, will be resumed. Be it resolved that this Senate condemn the government for its failure to effectively deal with the unacceptable and serious crime situation affecting law-abiding citizens. The members who have spoken on this matter already are Senator Saddam Hussain, who moved the motion, the Honourable Stuart Young MP, Minister of National Security, Senator Paul Richards, Senator Sean Sobers, Senator the Honourable Clarence Rambarat, Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for the opportunity to join in this debate on a motion, be it resolved that the Senate condemn the government for its failure to effectively deal with the unacceptable and serious crime situation affecting law-abiding citizens. I wish to thank my Senate colleague, Senator Saddam Hussein, for bringing a very important and critical motion that is grounded in facts, Madam President. It is a fact that it is the government's responsibility to ensure public safety and security of the citizenry. That is an undeniable fact. It is also a fact that thousands of citizens, businesses have been negatively affected by the high levels of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam President, it is most definitely a fact that the government, the present government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, ought to be resoundingly condemned for its failure to effectively deal with the crime situation, which remains both unacceptable and serious. In revising the earlier speakers, Madam President, as I prepared for the debate, it showed very clearly why we're in this situation that we're in. A senator proposes a motion for debate that speaks to a government that has not been able to effectively address a crime situation. And two of the members of the government bench, in addressing this important and critical motion, talking about the safety and security of our citizens, a primary role of the government, sought, instead of highlighting what they would have done or have done in what is almost their full term in office, Madam President, they sought to continue and perpetuate a blame game. An old narrative, Madam President, of whose fault is it? Pointing fingers, Madam President. And Trinidad and Tobago looked on then, and they will look on today, as we discuss a number one issue facing the people of our country. That we do not feel safe in our homes, we do not feel safe leaving our homes, and it is the responsibility of the government to address those concerns. What is needed, Madam President, is a holistic approach to dealing with the situation that we found ourselves in as a nation. I wish to remind members of the government bench who would speak today on this motion of a quote by their political leader and the Prime Minister of this country, Dr. Keith Rowley, who said, anytime the government resorts to blaming the opposition for its failure to deliver on its mandates and their responsibilities to the people, it is a clear sign that they have accepted and outlived their usefulness to the people of this country. Madam President, I have no doubt that, as we heard on the last occasion, and we will hear again today, a continuation of blame, finger pointing, and what we will absolutely not hear is any sort of solution or progressive policies and progressive reforms or proposals coming from this PNM government, Madam President. Recently, the Attorney General held a press conference. This press conference, Madam President, that I had to watch the replay of, showed exactly what I am talking about. It is taking what happened in the Parliament and pushing it to create a narrative that they hoped, I am sure, to distract from the issues of the day, that they hope would propel the people of Trinidad and Tobago into a line of thinking that would only benefit them. Instead of stating to the people of Trinidad and Tobago clearly and distinctly what the merits of the legislation that they were seeking to produce, to put forward as a solution, meant, they sought instead, the Attorney General, Madam President, in particular, sought instead to, I can't even find the words to describe the display that I saw for that particular press conference. But suffice it to say, Madam President, I know that the Attorney General is yet to speak in this debate. And it is my hope that as the people of Trinidad and Tobago look on at our debates as they hope that we as a parliament can come together and discuss solutions, that we as a parliament and we as leaders in society can speak to issues and facing our country, critical issues facing our country, that we would be able to do so in a manner that takes our country forward, that takes Trinidad and Tobago as a nation forward. In that regard, Madam President, I've stated before that the motion laid by my Senate colleague is grounded in facts, and so there is no need to go through the crime data and the statistics which shows that this government has failed to effectively deal with the crime situation. But it allows us to talk, Madam President, about what would a different government do? What would somebody who has, or a group of persons who have given a lot of thought to the situation that's facing us, and put all politics aside and all political rhetoric aside, who saw it fit to propose very early on, Madam President, a plan of action, what we intend to do should the people of Trinidad and Tobago ensure us with the mandate to protecting their safety and security. I'll start, Madam President, with the bail amendment bill, which I am sure the press conference I referred to dealt with, but which I am sure the Attorney General is coming here today to speak of. As it stands, Madam President, the United National Congress, our political leader, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, on speaking on the bail legislation and on why the United National Congress opted not to support the bail legislation in its form at this time, Madam President, it was not, as anybody on the government side sought to say, that we are in favor of higher crime or that we were obstructionists, because the record will show, Madam President, that when the legislation is good, when it is intended to benefit all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that they will get the opposition support. And where we believe the legislation is in fact too draconian and it has a negative impact on the rights of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that we will withhold our support. And so in speaking on bail reform as a whole, Madam President, Mrs. Persad-Bissessar and our team, the United National Congress as a team, is proposing a totality of bail reform, or indeed ways in which we can look at our system and ensure that it is equitable and that we can preserve rights without being too draconian and have an equitable approach, Madam President. And these include systems that would allow persons. In our proposed bail reform package, we will look at establishing a minimum security detention center in South, Central, North, and East Trinidad and Tobago. These will look to house non-violent offenders closest to their addresses, making it easier for family visits. Madam President, when we seek to approach the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and we say to them, if you trust us with your safety and security, we would not only propose legislative reforms, but we understand, Madam President, that the executive, any government, has a certain amount of power to deal with the situations that face the country. We'll say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and I say to them today, that we know you are worried about your safety and security, about your family's safety and your family's security, and that no government should seek to weaponize that fear, and seek to weaponize that fear in a way that would allow you to give up your rights in exchange for safety and security. We understand the social contract, and we understand that there is a responsibility of the government. And what we have seen, Madam President, is a government right now that has thrown their hands in the air and said it's not our job. It is the job of the police service to reduce the crime statistics. It is the job of the opposition to support any piece of legislation that we bring forward. It is the job of everybody else, but it is not their job. And this is why the motion, I think, is very correct to condemn the government for effectively dealing with the crime situation, simply because they have told us time and time again that it is not their job to do this. Any government seeking to create a safe and secure environment for our citizens, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, must, Madam President, and I do mean must, empower the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. In empowering the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the proposals in our crime plan for Trinidad and Tobago and our plan to return safety and security to people of Trinidad and Tobago, we would work with the TTPS and empower the TTPS to improve crime detection and ensuring crime prevention so that our citizens can feel safer in their homes, schools, workplaces, and daily activities. Madam President, we are not about wild accusations or promises that are without detail. When we talk about how we will do this, we will look at the root causes of crime: poverty, inequality, lack of opportunity. Madam President, these are critical elements that play into the crime situation that is currently plaguing our society. A common thread you would find running through all of the plans that a United National Congress is proposing would be investing in our people through education and training. Madam President, there were a number of initiatives and programs set to create an equitable society, a space for all of us in Trinidad and Tobago, where equity of opportunity would have transformed Trinidad and Tobago. And you would not get that sense. I think Dr. Rowley, in a speech in 2016, spoke about an angry population, that there are pockets of violence in society where people felt angry. And that led to the kind of criminality that we were seeing nationwide. Where's this anger coming from, Madam President? This anger could only come from a feeling of being left out by society, a feeling of that there are some people who can make it, while some of us, despite our best efforts, may not be able to access the same kind of opportunities that our fellow Trinidadians and Tobagonians may be able to. And so, Madam President, we would look at the programs and initiatives started before in the period 2010 to 2015 that were dedicated towards transforming all levels of our education sector. The reason, Madam President, that education is important in any debate discussing crime and criminality is because that is how you can move an entire generation out of the abyss that we found ourselves in. Equality in opportunity and expanding educational opportunities that would offer opportunities in skill training and trade qualifications, Madam President, would be essential in tackling the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago. The goal is inclusive and it is equitable. Our goals are inclusive and equitable society. Now, Madam President, I know that members of the government have said time and time again that they didn't have money, that there simply was not enough money to do these things. But their spending pattern would show, Madam President, that is quite simply not true. It's a question of priorities. And if you prioritize investing in the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you would definitely have seen the rewards of that investment. Madam President, in dealing with hotspots, we would look to create safe zones, reintroduce community policing, and ensuring police presence, traffic management, and other strategic actions for systematic and drastic reduction in crime within defined timeframes. The statistics are on our side, Madam President. Between 2010 to 2015, we saw a decline in the numbers. When this government came into power and sought to enact whatever policies or dismantle the policies they thought were not working and enact new policies, we saw in this 5-year period 2 years, Madam President, of murders crossing the 500 mark. We had not seen that in 10 years. So the numbers are on our side when we say what they have attempted to do quite simply did not work. Madam President, we will also, as I said, provide resources to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community. This goes across all of our policies, Madam President. All of the policies that we propose are looking at community building and ensuring...
Senator Haynes, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. And ensuring that Trinidad and Tobago, how we build our nation, is by ensuring that we build each community up. Every community is different. Every community has its different needs, different desires, and the only way you can know that is through effective representation. So we would take tackling the crime situation from a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach, Madam President, by looking at our communities as in their individual needs. We propose the introduction of community and village coordinator officer programs, whereby officers return to walk and talk with the members of the communities. This will serve not only for the purpose of intelligence gathering and crime detection, but for building trust within the communities that they serve. Madam President, we have thought long and hard about this crime situation. Despite what the government has done for almost 5 years now, which is find ways, new and novel ways to point fingers and find anybody else to blame for their failures and blatant incompetence. We've set to work, Madam President. We set to work to ensure that we had a detailed plan grounded in fact, grounded in data, grounded in solutions. We have disaggregated into short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. We have put these plans, Madam President, for public consumption early on. Because the time has gone, Madam President. The time is over for propaganda, blame game, finger pointing. The time to get to work is now. Trinidad and Tobago is depending on all of us, Madam President. All of us as leaders in society, as persons who seek to hold office, who may not seek to hold office, but also have an interest in the development of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, they are depending on us to look at these plans, to discuss these plans with some semblance of logic, of critique, and come up with something, a workable solution, Madam President, that we can all get behind to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago is once again a safe paradise. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Vera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, prior to COVID-19 and the COVID-19 stay-home regulations, crime was rampant and at an all-time high. The stay-home regulations have slowed down gun battles between rival gangs, but crime remains a real and present danger. I agree. It is government's responsibility to ensure public safety and security of the citizenry, and that thousands of citizens have been negatively impacted by the high levels of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. This motion challenges us to reflect on crime and the policies used by government in combating crime. Crime is a multi-headed hydra, which requires a multi-pronged approach. And there are as many views on what needs to be done to solve crime as there are citizens in this country. It reminds me of the Indian folk tale about the 6 blind men and the elephant. Not knowing what an elephant was, they argued day and night
on the subject. When they eventually encountered the animal, each had his own interpretation depending on the part he touched. If you recall the story, the first, touching the side of the animal, declared it was like a wall. The second, touching the trunk, was convinced it was like a large snake. The third, touching the tusks, felt the creature was as sharp and deadly as a spear. The fourth, touching one of the legs, proclaimed it was an extremely large cow. The fifth, feeling an ear, believed it was like a large fan. The sixth, holding the tail, declared it was little more than a piece of rope. Each, though partly right, was very wrong. And it was only by putting all the parts together that a true picture could emerge. And like the proverbial elephant, there are many parts to crime. There is violent crime, rape, murder, robbery, kidnapping. There is hidden crime, incest, child abuse, domestic violence. There's organized crime, counterfeiting, illegal quarrying, drugs, arms, human trafficking. There's cybercrime, and there is white-collar crime, embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and intellectual property offenses. So we should not be like the 6 blind men, certain and strident about just one part of the elephant, while missing the bigger picture. Charging in with guns blazing and sirens blaring is counterproductive when you're treating with incest and child abuse. Capturing or killing the foot soldiers of organized crime is little cause for celebration. The other day, one of my neighbors cut down a mango tree in his yard, notwithstanding my appeals to the contrary. He didn't do the actual cutting. He used a work crew. Now, getting angry or upset or pleading with his workers would have been an exercise in futility, because each of them was easily replaceable and none of them were the directing minds. And it is the same with organized crime. Going behind minions is ineffective. One must follow the money, use intelligence, and exercise patience in snaring the directing minds. Again, urban methods and approaches will not be appropriate when tackling predial larceny, illegal quarrying, wildlife traffickers. So militarizing law enforcement and imprisonment must not and cannot be the only tools in our anti-crime toolkit. And focusing on the symptoms without understanding or treating with the causes will never solve the problem. Implicit in this motion is the assumption that the government can fix crime. But I think that is idealistic and simplistic. In order to tackle crime effectively, we need to understand the drivers of crime and the organization of crime. We need the right tools and to shore up our systems, which are already under great pressure, by providing them with the right support, by plugging the gaps, and by ensuring that our law enforcement agencies do not operate in silos. Most importantly, we need to recognize that tackling crime is everybody's business, not just the responsibility of government and law enforcement. Whether it is this government or any other administration, piecemeal and ad hoc measures won't work. Plaster and Scotch tape won't hold. I agree with Senator Haynes that long-term holistic solutions are necessary. I agree with her that resolving the crime situation is ultimately about shaping our society into a kinder, fairer, and better place. Drastic social and economic changes will be needed. Consider, too, the needs and motivations of people who engage in crime. These can be biological in origin. They can be psychological in nature, or they can be socially induced. The causes of crime may include, for example, mental illness, drug addiction, crimes of passion because someone could not handle their emotions, poverty, social inequality, a breakdown of family and breakdowns in community, poorly designed housing projects and slums, and the fact that Trinidad and Tobago is in the middle of a global supply chain for organized crime. Each aspect has its own unique challenges, which requires it being dealt with in a certain way. Law enforcement has its place, but it also has its limits. I'm concerned, for example, about our vulnerable young men, many of whom are less educated and will never earn as much as their female counterparts. This inequality between the sexes is a recipe for all kinds of societal problems. We should be asking why our boys are not doing as well as our girls in school. Where are the male teachers, the absent fathers, the male role models? When men aren't socialized into becoming responsible, respectful, and internally strong, they are susceptible to the wrong types of peer pressure and to the influence of gangs. Getting tougher on crime per se will not solve this. In fact, it may even aggravate the situation. So we as a society need to devise appropriate policies and programs towards addressing the social conditions which create the catalyst for crime. We cannot ignore the rising unemployment and the lack of opportunities, the low-end, dead-end jobs with frequent periods of unemployment contributing to low self-esteem. It's already hard for young graduates, far less for young people with poor educational backgrounds. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to associate criminality with being poor, because there are many poor who never commit crime, no matter how desperate their circumstances. Conversely, there are many well-off people who engage in criminal activity by non-physical and covert means, crooks and criminals in every sense of the word. But when we concentrate people who are already at risk in poorly designed housing projects, we create conditions for certain types of crime. No one subculture should be allowed to dominate a physical space. We need to structure housing in a way that mitigates against subcultures forming, especially those that are antisocial. Another critical interplay, another critical factor is the interplay of the criminal justice system. The police, the DPP's department, legal aid, the courts, the prisons. As what criminals do and how criminal careers develop can be influenced by the agents of criminal justice. Research suggests that reform of the criminal justice system is one of the best ways to reducing crime. The reactions of the criminal justice system can push suspects and first-time offenders into criminal careers, or it can deter them from further crime. Promptness and certainty of punishment also affects criminal behavior. If an offender is punished soon after committing a crime, both the specific deterrence of the individual concerned and general deterrence of the public tends to be greater than if the offender is not punished until years after. Similarly, potential offenders think twice when they know they're not just facing a fine or going to get a slap on the wrist. The sentence should always fit the crime. Our courts must use the widest array of sentencing options, not just fine and imprisonment, but the ability to impose restitution orders, community service orders, orders requiring offenders to attend educational programs, vocational training, counseling, medical treatment, and also to confiscate the proceeds of crime. We can pass all the laws we want and pontificate about zero crime tolerance, but if the criminal justice system is not working as a properly functioning ecosystem, we won't win the war against crime. One of the reasons people fall in line in Singapore is because there's a physical consequence for antisocial behavior. So perhaps we should follow Singapore in making greater use of the Corporal Punishment Offenders Over 18 Act, which allows High Court judges to impose sentences of flogging to any male offender over 18 on being convicted. And maybe we can extend the jurisdiction to magistrates and include environmental offenses. Child abuse, domestic violence, licks for anybody who wants to lash woman, who robs and beats old people, or who sexually molests a child. But punishment cannot be the be-all and end-all. There must also be an emphasis on crime prevention, restorative justice, and social rehabilitation. Is it time to consider national service for young men who are not studying or in full-time employment? Should we have boot camps designed to get offenders away from crime, the gangs, and bad influences by subjecting them to discipline, rigorous exercise, civics appreciation, and strenuous work? I sit behind Senator Hussain. We serve together on committees. He is a hardworking, articulate, and bright man. He's a man of faith and principle. His motion is well-intentioned, and I understand the sentiments behind it, but I think it misses the mark. Can government do better? Certainly, yes. But we have considered legislation brought by government to tackle all manner of crime: bail, firearms, sexual offenses, money laundering, white-collar crime. And we are also aware of important work being done with the judiciary, the DPP's department, and other stakeholders towards improving the criminal justice system and towards updating justice delivery to better suit the needs and circumstances of this time. This motion has generated and will generate useful ideas and insights, but the criminals will win when we get stuck in partisan politics, when we only engage in subjective observations and defensive posturing. We must find common ground. All things considered, while crime remains a cause for concern, I am not persuaded that there's been a failure on government's part in tackling the scourge of crime. Effectively dealing with crime can only be achieved by a combination of deterrence, enforcement, and rehabilitation under an effective criminal justice system. And this is a work in progress. We must be strategic. Dealing with the causes of crime, and not just the results of crime, cannot fall to government alone. It is our collective responsibility. It involves addressing the inequities in society, and I think it requires us as a people to transition from a spectator democracy to one that is a participatory democracy. I thank you.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank honourable senators for, again, through you, Madam President, allowing me the opportunity to contribute to yet another debate in the Senate. Madam President, I want to pick up where Senator Vera just left off. And I'd like to use this opportunity to connect dots. You see, Senator Haynes in her submissions sought to anticipate some contribution that I, in her mind, was going to make to attribute a blame game. I don't need to address a blame game. Senator Vera is absolutely correct. Crime is where it is because there are many parts to the equation. And I dare say now from this position in this Senate today that previous governments have not addressed an holistic, articulating vision. And it is not called a crime plan. as my opponents opposite often refer to. It's called an anti-crime plan, an ACP if you want, that has the constituent elements. I'll speak today as a government representative who can attest to what was done under my hand as Attorney General, our hand as government, because we're a collective whole with many different parts working through many different ministers. And permit me to address 8 layers of work in addressing crime. Now, is crime a major issue in this country? Yes. Is it a major issue today? Has it been a major issue on years past agenda? Yes, it has been. The question is, can you acquit yourself as a government in proffering a solution with the resources that you have? You see, resources in a governmental context include legislation, administrative reform, societal reform, and then a combination of hope based upon performance, vision informing progress. And permit me to dive directly into that. So we know in Trinidad and Tobago, we're roughly 1.3 million people. As Attorney General, the record shows the first place I started was in the prisons. A national dialogue on prisons, how much it cost, how many people were there, how long it took for matters to go ahead, because that's the litmus test. If you've got a prisoner incarcerated in pre-trial incarceration for 20 years, then something is wrong in your society. You're spending billions of dollars in that condition, but there's no consequence to crime, therefore there's no deterrent, therefore the justice system is not working, therefore the victim is not looked after, the innocent person is not acquitted, and therefore society has no consequence. And therefore Senator Vera was absolutely right. One must address the criminal justice system. So let me build out these 8 layers and connect the work that this government has done. Number 1, at our core level, first layer, we know that preliminary inquiries were up to 20 years in running. We know that the backlog is 43,000 indictable cases in arrears. We know that the disposition rate is at best 40% per year, with 60% going into the backlog. We know that there's a high volume in the magistracy, 146,000 cases per annum. We know that there's overcrowding of the near 4,000 prisoners in incarceration. Do they all need to be there? Are they best accommodated? Are you creating criminals in the prisons? We know that our courts were not developed for years. 1985 was the last time we had a major court development in this country when we opened the Hall of Justice. We know that the criminal courts operated with no rules, no procedures, no technology, no staff. We know that there were no masters of court. We know that there were no registrars. We know that you had a clerk of the peace effectively running the entire magistracy from an administrative level. So what did we do in the first layer? In the first layer, what we did was to address the court system. Let's talk about that. We looked at the courts, we looked at the judicial officers and staff in the courts, we looked at the court personnel, we looked at the prosecutor who appears in court, we looked at the defense attorney who appears in court, we looked at forensics, intelligence, evidence, we looked at the police that manage 95% of our prosecution, and we looked at the prisons. Because in that first layer, you can't talk about stamping out crime and passing laws only, as we saw the opposition do in their 5 years prior to this, without addressing the system where that law must go to work. So here's what we did. We created 2 children's courts, one in Faizabad, one in Port of Spain, born out of the Children Division. We are at the cusp of opening new civil courts where the Parliament was at the waterfront. We will save $6 million in rent. We will have 12 civil high courts, 2 appeal courts, 32 judges' chambers, occupy 13 floors. We will finish those projects in the month of June. And when we do that, we open 64 new criminal courts under a criminal division at the Hall of Justice. When we do that, it's 69 courts, 5 mediation rooms, 40 courtrooms, 24 hearing rooms. Let me repeat that. By a simple move of renovating this red house, moving the civil courts to the waterfront, we are allowed the privilege of opening 69 new criminal courts in Port of Spain alone. In San Fernando, we've already started the Magistrates Court. That ground should break very shortly at Irving Street. In Princestown and Rio Claro, we've already allocated those courts for construction. The Siparia Court expansion, the Arima Court expansion. So we're adding beyond that new pool of courts across the rest of the country. We've created in this tenure, under this government, 12 courts at the remand yard and Golden Grove. In a 3-month period alone, March 16th, 2020 to May 13th, 2020, thanks to opening these courts, we've stopped moving prisoners, and we have had in that period 1,450 matters heard. With the prisoner at the prison, the judge at the court, and the lawyers at home. In that, we have had the implementation of electronic filing. Electronic filing was born by way of practice direction 2nd April 2020, but it was born out of the payment into and out of court legislation that we did in 2018. It was born out of Section 24 in the Criminal Division and Traffic Courts Act, which we did in 2017. Judicial officers, your criminal justice system has to have people working in the system. We moved from 36 judges to 64 judges in the High Court in terms of legislative capacity. We did that in the Family and Children Division Act 2016, the Miscellaneous Provisions Supreme Court of Judicature Act 2018. We moved from 12 Court of Appeal judges to 15 Court of Appeal judges via the Miscellaneous Provisions Supreme Court of Judicature Act. In 2015, there were 2 masters in the court, people who deal with the case preparation. We are now moving our way to 25 masters, having appointed 9 children court masters, 5 family court masters, 5 criminal court masters, another 10 masters to be appointed in a matter of weeks. You see, masters prepare the cases for trial. Cabinet then went and we legislatively moved the judicial age of retirement from 65 to 70. So our judges stopped going abroad to carry out the rest of their career. They stay right here and work 5 more years of judicial tenure and expertise born and kept in Trinidad and Tobago. 5 temporary judges were appointed only on the 1st of May 2020. We increased the judicial allowances for retirement. You remember the opposition said no? The government said yes. The independents said yes. We raised judicial pension to keep judges on the bench so they won't go to greener pastures. What do we do with magistrates? You remember the Magistrates Protection Act? We did stage 1. Stage 2, we just came back a couple of weeks ago and we dealt with full immunity for magistrates because we gave magistrates more judicial power and therefore they needed more protection. What do we do in court personnel? How are you going to make the courts work if you don't have people to support the judges? 217 non-standardized contract positions, 84 standardized positions, 93 new classes of assistants, 25 officers for judges and masters support, teams of 5 officers in each criminal master, 5 divisional secretaries, 5 divisional JSOs, 5 divisional assistants, 5 divisional orderlies. You see, you have to have judicial research officers as well. The judge doesn't work to do everything. We replicated the work we had in the civil division. We applied it in the criminal division. This is not what we're going to do, you know. This is what has been done. 64 unutilized positions brought back up. Redeployed 22 vacant positions. Witness support unit, bail management unit, all installed and up and working. You need a prosecutor to do the job, which is why the DPP in conducting 5% prosecution and the TTPS in managing 95% prosecution, The DPP's office in Tobago opened. The DPP's office at Port of Spain to be opened in the month of June. The DPP's office at Gulf City in San Fernando in the course of being constructed out now, having been secured. DPP personnel, we move from 27% occupancy to 40% filled. We will take all of the vacant positions and fill them as soon as we open the Port of Spain office. Further staff to be done, scanning positions. We amended the law to allow the prosecutor to also include officially under law the police prosecutors. That was done in Indictable Proceedings Amendment Act 2019. What about the defense attorney? You've got more judges, you have more prosecutors, you have courts. Where are you getting a defense attorney from where 20 defense attorneys control the bar? We passed administratively and birthed the public defenders system. We took a UNC senator then appeared Haseen Sheikh, qualified as #1 in the interviews, and this Attorney General hired a UNC senator to be the chief public defender, up and running already. That building at Stanmore Avenue is weeks away from completion, where 30 new officers complement the criminal bar. What do we have apart from public defenders? Well, you know that we did the $100 million forensic lab with the Chinese government to be built next to Mount Hope. You know that we operationalized the DNA position. We ordered the 15,000 DNA kits. They are in the system. We introduced the custodian. The custodian is at work. We allowed for the armorers to be improved. We dealt with intelligence, SSA Amendment Act, Interception of Communications Act, which was passed in this Senate already, is landmark intelligence. Not what we're going to do, but what has been done. Madam President, what time is full time?
You finish at 2:53.
2:53.
44, yeah.
Madam President, we dealt with witness anonymity in the evidence bill. We dealt with the police service. We introduced new units, white-collar units, prosecutorial units. We then go, if we take quickly in a couple of minutes, I wish I had time to explain it all. Let's go to layer 2. You forget that there were no divisions of court prior to this government. We birthed the Family and Children Division, the Criminal Division, the Road Traffic Division. We prepared the legislation for the e-probate structures, for the civil, probate, and other divisions. 3 divisions of court. We brought in rules of court. How do you get the quickening of justice without rules? When we came in, we only had the civil proceedings rules, the maintenance rules, and the family proceedings rules. Today, we have the probate rules, e-probate rules, CPR amendments to 2019, criminal proceedings rules 2016 to 2019, family and children division rules, child rules, the community residence rules, the rehabilitation centers rules, the judges rules for children. None of those existed prior to my tenure as Attorney General. We did legislative and process reform. There was no criminal case flow management before this government. There were no masters of the criminal court preparing trials. There was no child management arena. There were no registrars in the magistrates' court. For those of us who are practicing attorneys, you have to understand a court requires a registrar. Can you imagine a magistrate's court with no structure and no registrar?
Attorney General, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, in the process reform, we have included e-payment and e-filing. That's up and running and real in Trinidad and Tobago right now, not speculation. We've added in the motor vehicle and road traffic amendments. Those will declog the system to remove, by the time you count the removal of marijuana matters, motor vehicle and road traffic offenses, and preliminary inquiries. As tomorrow we go live with the motor vehicle and road traffic amendments, you are taking the magisterial caseload down from 146,000 cases to 8,500 cases per year, with 43 magistrates and a better reform system, with process reform and rules, etc. Madam President, we introduced court IT. Right now, lawyers are living in a first world environment where we are appearing in court virtually. Madam President, let's get to the fact that we introduce hard crime measures. Let the Senate remember the Anti-Terrorism Act, the bail amendments, the Anti-Gang Act, the non-profit organizations, the economic sanctions orders, the animal welfare, the sexual offenses amendments, the firearm amendments, the cybercrime bill, the sexual offenses, other amendments that we did, the law enforcement officers bill to create crimes for tipping off, etc., and protections, the private security bill, the trespass act, the interception of communication act, the SSA regs and SSA act, hard crime being managed. But we didn't stop there. We went on to following the money. We did FATCA, we did Global Forum, we did civil asset forfeiture and explain your wealth. We did proceeds of crime. We amended the money laundering offenses. We did amendments to the Income Tax Act, the Customs Act, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act. We did amendments in all of those structures so that we could take the profit out of crime. Who can forget that crime exists in companies, land, and cash? Does the Senate recall the demonetization of the $100 note? $500 million did not come back into the system. We killed $500 million of corrupt money. And several billion dollars are under suspicious activity investigation. We have today the first two explain your wealth legislation matters in the courts as we speak. We have money laundering. But Madam President, can you forget plea bargaining, MSI matters, judge-only trials? These are not hypothetical matters. These are all up and running. We have done judge-only matters for murder, one by way of acquittal, one by way of conviction which did not go to appeal. We dealt with 400 MSI matters over one long vacation period alone. Madam President, who can forget the gaming legislation killed by the UNC? Who can forget the Financial Obligations Regulations Review, the Revenue Authority? Madam President, this government introduced campaign finance reform, laid in the House of Representatives and put to a joint select committee. The motor vehicle and road traffic includes eyes everywhere, cameras, spot speed enforcement, RF tag IDs. Madam President, we don't need to blame the UNC for anything. We need only look at our track record of what has been done. Relatively speaking, in a 5-year period, we have taken 40 years of reform and brought them to life. Can we do more? Yes. And we will in the next 5 years in government that we have. Can we ensure that the process is uninterrupted? Yes. But I can say here today, without doubt in my mind, that the reform that this government has birthed is exponentially excellent. And I take pleasure in saying that, Madam President. I reject the motion on behalf of the government that Senator Hussain has brought, and I thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Senator Amin.
Madam President, I thank you for this opportunity. And I want to thank Senator Saddam Hussein for bringing this motion to the Parliament to discuss this government's failure to address crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Further, Madam President, this motion is also to discuss the increase in crime under this PNM administration. They have not only failed to address crime or to reduce crime, they are responsible for an increase in murders, a record number of murders being committed in this country. Madam President, the first failure of this government is that it does not have a plan to fight crime. The fact that no one, let us take the politics out of it, forget what the UNC is saying for now. No one in civil society, no one in the legal fraternity, no one in crime fighting could clearly identify what the government's plan for crime is. The government has continued to say that it has a plan. It is clearly a very secret plan. It is clearly not well articulated at all, if it exists. We have heard members of the government tell us that it is secret for security reasons, that they cannot reveal the measures they are taking to fight crime because the criminals will be aware and will take in front. Well, apparently, Madam President, the results of their crime-fighting initiatives are also secret. It is not being reflected in the murder rate in this country. It is not being reflected in the feeling of safety and security that the citizens have. Surely, the fact that more people are living in fear under this PNM government is an indication of their failure to deal with crime. The Attorney General who spoke before me, Madam President, listed bills that have been passed, a number of legislative measures. I appreciate that the Attorney General's portfolio is to bring legislation to Parliament and to advise the government on same. So, of course, his list of achievements would be bills, legislative measures, steps within the judiciary. And unfortunately, Madam President, those exist on paper. I have been a part of the opposition bench in this Senate, and I have participated in a number of debates on some of the bills mentioned by the Attorney General. Many of those things have not borne fruit yet. The PNM spoke on their platform in their campaign in 2015 about campaign reform, campaign finance reform. And you come here 4 3/4 years after to tell us that you have just laid the bill in the lower house and that it has gone to a joint select committee. If you were so ready when you promised this nation campaign finance reform in 2015, it would have happened already. But you clearly lack the political will. The results on the ground from all the pieces of legislation listed by the Attorney General is not showing. Madam President, amongst those listed included measures in the Magistrates' Court, bail, and so on. The Attorney General spoke about the construction of the court in San Fernando. At present, on Irvin Street, there's a site surrounded by a galvanized fence. There has been no construction activity there. You have some stray dogs around the place. That is the only activity that is taking place. Madam President, the fact that the government has allocated money, has identified a project, is one thing. They come and they boast about it. But the fact is, what is happening on the ground is inactivity. The government has to answer for that. The Attorney General would have also spoken about a DPP's office being constructed in San Fernando. For more than 5 years, the situation has existed. The Attorney General himself is the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West, and he would be familiar, or should be familiar, with the needs and the happenings in South Trinidad if he spends a lot of time there. But the truth is that that office is nowhere close to being opened. And turning the sod is not an achievement. So if a person does not see for themselves on the ground what is happening, and they believe the Attorney General, they would think that this government has achieved a lot. But the truth is that on the ground out there, it is just not happening. The DNA legislation that the Attorney General mentioned, I remember when the Attorney General spoke in the Parliament, he indicated that the government was ready to operationalize this thing, that there were DNA kits in the port waiting to be cleared and waiting to come in. The regulations, I don't believe the regulations have even been finalized for this DNA, for the DNA Act. There was talk about construction of a forensic science center. Nothing has come out of that yet. I'm sure the government will tell us that they are working on it. If this is a priority, why 4 3/4 years later, you have not made any achievements? There is no tangible result. You are not closer to achieving this promise. So you come now on the eve of a general election to say, in 5 more years, we will get it done. It appears, Madam President, that that is going to be the narrative for this government to answer for their lack of achievement, for their empty promises. The Minister of Works was quoted in a newspaper as saying that he needs 5 more years to stop all flooding in Trinidad and Tobago completely. So it seems to be a common thread in their bid to explain their lack of achievement. Madam President, the staffing of the court system is also something that the government has spoken a lot about. There's agreement within society and within the political parties that our justice system is just too slow. Victims of crime have their trauma dragged on because court cases take so long. You took 4 years to hire staff for the court system, and yet you still have courts that are dilapidated, some that are completely closed, operating on shift, no paper to print a judgment, a photocopy a document. No, I mentioned no air condition already, but dilapidated conditions in general. So is it that the 4 years you took to hire staff and you now have improper conditions for them to work in, or in fact no space at all, that does not make the court system more efficient? There has been no reduction in the times for trials. There has been no increase in the sense of justice in this country based on the slow pace of court cases. Passing bills is not an achievement if there are no results in the statistics, the number of crimes committed, in the swiftness of justice. This government has presided over the highest number of murders, and every week there is a new explanation. Madam President, I think the country has had 4 3/4 years to judge. You have presided over terror in this country. You have no moral authority to ask for 5 more years. Madam President, we have spoken at different debates about measures to reach the root of crime within communities, the empowerment of young people, of at-risk sectors of society, through education, through culture, through sports. The government has bashed programs that existed under the People's Partnership Government, but they have not sought to replace that with anything to reach these at-risk young people. Madam President, those at-risk groups, it's not only youth, I don't want us to tarnish our young people. Many young people are at risk, but they are not the only demographic group at risk. But I want to ask Trinidad and Tobago, do you believe that these at-risk youth who are dying, who are making up numbers with our murder rate, own the boats to bring in $6 million in drugs in this country? Do those young people, or do those at-risk people, however you want to call it, who are arrested for criminal activities, have the resources to bring guns into this country? Madam President, we come back to the big fish theory. And who is protecting the real doers of crime in Trinidad and Tobago? This government has, on more than one occasion, shown to be closely affiliated to those elements. And if they continue to be in charge, they will not be able to put a dent in crime. The results, the facts are that the murder rate was decreased when the People's Partnership was in government. It was decreased when Mr. Basdeo Pandey was Prime Minister. And the number of murders increase exponentially when the PNM is in government. They are responsible. Madam President, I remember at one time there was an argument where the government, in seeking to defend its incompetence, was trying to link the opposition to these elements of crime. In fact, the Minister of National Security said in the public domain that there were members of the UNC tied to some murders that took place in Port of Spain. He made that statement, and when he was pressed to call names, he withdrew that statement and started to say something else, that the opposition members were affiliated to the criminal element in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I don't think any member of the opposition had their stepdaughter arrested for any drug charges. But
Senator Amin, I will ask you now, please, just to withdraw that last statement.
Well,
questions, just withdraw it.
That no opposition member.
Withdraw your last statement.
The statement that no opposition member.
Repeat it, you know.
No, I want to clarify because.
No, I didn't ask you to repeat it. I asked you to withdraw it. You should know what you said.
Well, I'm not sure exactly which part of the statement, Madam President.
Take a guess, Senator.
You wanted me to withdraw.
Just take a guess. Take a guess.
Because I'm just stating something on behalf of my colleagues. I'm not Madam President, so with your guidance, Madam President,
Senator Amin.
Pardon?
You have not withdrawn
I'm
the
not
statement.
clear, Madam President, on which part of the statement you would
that
like me
very
to withdraw.
last statement that you made is what I'm asking you to withdraw.
And I just want to confirm whether it is the statement that no member of the opposition had their stepdaughter on any
That
arrest.
is the statement.
All right. But that is a statement of fact, but Madam President.
Senator Amin, it's either you withdraw it now or you take your seat. So take your choice. Make it right now.
Madam President, I will withdraw that on your request. But Madam President.
Senator Amin, just move on.
Madam President, on your request, I withdraw that statement.
Senator Amin, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. The fact is that as a part of the opposition, I can say categorically that I have had no affiliation to any criminal element in this country, and none of my colleagues as well. Madam President, in spite of the insinuations of the government, I think the population knows the truth. And when we make promises on political platforms, when we campaign and ask to represent and govern this country, you govern for all. Madam President, this government has already started to try to reach out to those groups they have neglected. There are sections of society who, if they begin to speak, members of this government will run and hide. Madam President, the thing is that as much as they say, as much as they speak, as much as they try to blame the opposition, which seems to be their mantra, the country will judge for itself. Madam President, I want to remind this population of the terror they have lived under for the past 4 3/4 years. I want to remind the population that murders were at a record low under the People's Partnership, and it has increased tremendously under this government. I want to remind the population not to fall for the mamagai and the sweet talk that will come on the campaign trail. The PNM has a pattern of neglecting people, of taking away from people. They will literally take bread from your mouth and give you a crumb and tell you that you should be grateful. And that is what we have been seeing in the last few months. And I want to remind you that as the election comes around, paving roads is not going to help you. Making more promises is not going to help you. Asking for 5 more years to do what you have failed to do in the last 5 years is not going to help you. If any of the members of the government have any conscience, they will not ask this population to vote for them. Madam President, the government is responsible for crime, and I take this opportunity to condemn their failure, their incompetence, their lack of political will when it comes to dealing with crime. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Thompson-Aye.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm pleased to speak on this private member's motion. I am less likely to be constrained by a charge of irrelevance justifying my being shut down to the ground when in full flight. And if I am to mix metaphors, I have to fold my tent like the Arabs and quietly steal away to return and debate another day. I'm glad that the CPC is getting a break, though. They must be tired of my giving them a hard time. Really is the Attorney General's fault. I must agree with Senator Hussain when he said that thousands of citizens and businesses have been negatively affected by high levels of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Crime is a matter of grave concern to our citizenry, pun intended. Yeah, no pun intended, sorry. However, when I examine the first clause of the motion, it is the government's responsibility to ensure public safety and security of the citizenry, I detect an erroneous assumption. The underlying premise is that it is government's sole responsibility to ensure public safety and security of its citizens. That is incorrect. While government has a broad overall role and a serious responsibility, the citizenry and the corporate sector must play their respective roles. We speak of a war against crime, but from where must the soldiers come? Where must they be recruited to fight this war? Government cannot do it alone. If we're not prepared to play our role in this theater of life, which is akin to the wild, wild west, we might as well hang up our boots and sing, "Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, oh boy, you're gonna die." Is the mover of the motion saying that the criminals are in charge? That government is hopeless and we are helpless? Sad am I that Senator Saddam, pun intended, thinks so. But I can't play in that carnival band of pessimism. The costume just will not fit. If we're not part of the solution, we are part of the problem. The United Nations guidelines for the prevention of crime outline the role of government in a collective approach to crime. And with your permission, Madam President, I quote, "It is the responsibility of all levels of government to create, maintain, and promote a context within which relevant government institutions and all segments of civil society, including the corporate sector, can better play their part in preventing crime." These guidelines state the factors which cause crime and violence to increase or decline are closely linked to many social, economic, and environmental issues, and governments cannot rely solely on the criminal law and justice systems to ensure safety. Multi-sector partnership between ministries such as housing, health, education and employment, recreation, social services and environmental, and the police and justice sector can only make a significant difference to crime levels, and by establishing proactive rather than reactive strategies to prevent crime and victimization. Now, these guidelines set out 8 principles which govern prevention: government leadership, socio-economic development and inclusion, cooperation and partnership, sustainability and accountability, use of a knowledge base, human rights, rule of law, culture of lawfulness, interdependency, meaning the links between local crime and international organized crime, and differentiation, meaning recognizing the different needs of men, women, and vulnerable groups. Now, more needs to be done to integrate crime prevention strategies into social and economic policies in at-risk communities. And we've heard that before in this debate. Large, low-income housing estates are breeding grounds for criminality. Recreational facilities are few and far between and take too long to be put in place. Inadequate lighting in common areas create opportunities for crime. And you have suffocating concrete roofs at times, which make for discomfort, short tempers, and family discord, and may even cause domestic violence. The New Zealand Catholic bishops, in a pastoral letter entitled "Creating New Hearts, Moving from Retributive to Restorative Justice," and if I may quote, Madam President, they stated, "Crime escalates most where social injustice prevails. In particular, there is a desperate need to provide affordable housing, adequate benefits, good health, and more employment. Deprivation in these areas forms a type of structural violence against the poor, who are often left inadequately fed and in poor health with little by way of shelter, money, or hope." Now, these are all areas the government should tackle as a priority. The words are as relevant to New Zealand as it is to Trinidad and Tobago. And the bishops caution that social deprivation should not be a cause for personal lawlessness and crime. It's not a cop-out. Poverty may provide the environment for some crime, but should not provide an excuse. Greed and selfishness are also principal causes. Now, we've heard in this debate about corporate sector complaining about crime. And often it is their greed and their selfishness that have brought us to this sorry pass. Corporate responsibility must not only be visibly manifest around carnival time, sponsorships of fetes and so on. During the year, many NGOs are struggling with token assistance, and they're doing great social work. Even so, I welcome government oversight of NGOs, some of whose activities and members should be closely scrutinized to ensure personal gain is not part of their game. There are many areas in need of reform. Some persons involved in crime have mental illnesses, and I speak particularly about child offenders. Early detection and treatment can be a problem here. And in fact, there's no hospital still dedicated to care of such children. Many children drop out of school every year. And that is always, school is a protective factor, so that creates a problem. The curriculum does not suit their needs. They have learning disabilities which are not addressed. Some are pushed out of school because they're antisocial behavior. And it is thought that that warrants zero tolerance rather than our using restorative justice practices, which will actually get to the root causes of their behavior. Now, my personal intervention with certain social welfare agencies in Trinidad and Tobago on behalf of clients and members of my church community have led me to appreciate Stalin words. Black man got to keep on jamming. Black man to get a little something. Black man don't get nothing easy. It's sad but true. But I see that the new minister is really trying to make a difference. So maybe COVID has produced something. The initial cooperation between government and civil society groups may unravel in times of austerity. Funding may become scarce, and you have excellent programs that are being scuttled. And this is, in fact, in opposition to proven practice as a basis for policies and programs. If something is working well, what we should do is work and encourage it. Yet what we have today is some of the servile life centers, which have served us well, have had to be closed. Some of their vital parenting programs have had to be curtailed because they have been sacrificed on the altar of other competing interests. We will receive good marks for taking cognizance of the links between local crime and international organized crime. And putting laws in place, we've heard a lot of laws spoken about by Attorney General to eradicate this plague from our society. The Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, have been working hard with the Children Authority to try to save those at-risk children. However, we will receive a failing grade with respect to our promotion of the culture of lawfulness. We are a lawless society. Before Mr. COVID came and took up temporary residence in our land, I would see scores of cars line up in the night along the priority bus route as the police busily engaged themselves in increasing government coffers. On my way to the Senate one day, I saw two high school boys risking their lives, dodging fast-moving cars instead of using the Sealos flyover, built at considerable expense to save lives. I observed a parent walking his daughter, and as he passed the car, I asked him, why those boys not using the walkover? In my naivety, I hope he would admonish them. To my shock, the man turned to me angrily and said, why don't mind your business? As he walked away, his daughter, about 7 years, kept looking at me in bewilderment. I was grateful he didn't prefix the word business with damn. The Child Protection and Domestic Violence Units are welcome initiatives to the police service in the fight against crime. And we trust they will continue to go from strength to strength. But police need our help in both crime prevention and detection. Are there opportunities to pass on information to the police? You've heard time and again, if you see something, say something. If you tell it to a friend who cannot help it, it's mere gossip. If as head of an institution, your charges tell you they have to sign as receiving a stipend in a program and then hand over a portion to a supervisor, why tell AHI? Tell the fraud squad, not me. If someone hides guns in your yard, it is not enough to relocate post haste, saying the police are waste. Call 800 tips, Crime Stoppers will fix. They are good citizens, not of the kind Sparrow sarcastically sang, but many who are prepared to assist the police in their fight against crime. But as a businessman, if you visit a government office and you're told that this will take a long time, that should not be translated to mean if you bribe me, the waiting period will miraculously disappear. And successive registered generals have lamented their anguish over the level of corruption in the department. I even heard an employee saying he can make any certificate, but in those days, certificates were handwritten, and having the new technology has really helped. More recently, the introduction of new $100 bills stimulated creative explanations in some. Others were left counting their losses, as you've heard. So white-collar crime does give rise to violent crime. The perpetrators of such crime do kill informants whom they suspect will reveal or have revealed their nefarious acts of corruption. Employees of money launderers frequently know what their bosses are doing, but they dare not speak because they want to live. Those engaged in human and drug trafficking use gypsy little black boys to do their bidding while hiding under the guise of legitimate business. Who is Mr. Big, of whom PM Manning used to speak? Why can't we name and deal with him? If we don't know who he is, aren't we running the risk of holding him up to use as an exemplar and bestowing on him prestigious awards? Government has mounted a multi-pronged attack on crime. Our Commissioner of Police is indefatigable. The police are working hard. More arrests are being made and illegal guns retrieved. The second limb of the motion remains valid. Thousands of citizens and businesses have been negatively affected by the high levels of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. We speak of a war against crime. But what are our weapons? We have heard the Commissioner of Police repeatedly speak of the sophisticated weapons. We do not have mass weapons of destruction, but we have weapons of word construction. In the Parliament, we use our weapons of word construction to create laws, and we have done a great deal of that over the last few months to the extent that we feel overwhelmed. For the first time, there is a concerted attack on white-collar crime. The Attorney General has been relentless with his mantra, follow the money. But before we create the law, we must be guided by philosophy. If we are not guided by tried and tested principles, our efforts will come to naught. W.E.B. Du Bois said, the chief problem in any community cursed with crime is not the punishment of the criminals, but the prevention of the youth from being trained to crime. But unfortunately, we spend more money on cure than we do on prevention. We must focus on the youth. In 1993, I was attending the Integrity Commission Symposium at Central Bank. I was accosted by a legal luminary. He said, I hear you're going to Australia. I hope it's not with my taxpayer dollars, you know. You have no business going to Australia unless I can sleep comfortably in my bed. I was going to the first World Congress on Family Law and Children Rights in Australia. I did attend, and I learned so much about child rights that I brought back to that country, this country. And I've attended dozens of conferences and symposia, regionally and internationally. I also learned in Sydney that Trinidad and Tobago was not the land of the hummingbird, nor steel band, nor calypso, nor carnival, nor chutney, or soca, but Brian Lara country. Because every day I traveled to and from Sydney Convention Center, the taxi driver, learning I was from Trinidad, would go into ecstasy to meet someone from Brian Lara's country. Now, the point of my central bank encounter is that many learned people do not see the link between child rights and citizen security. My mother used to say, meekly wait and murmur not. So fast forward to 2015, to then President Obama, Caribbean Basin Initiative in that year. He saw the need to arrest the spiraling growth in youth crime in the Caribbean, which he saw as potentially threatening the security of the United States. So it wasn't purely altruistic. So the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which was devoted to juvenile justice, better called child justice, was born. And this involved improving the legal and regulatory framework of the child justice system, capacity building for effective administration, modernization of diversion, detention, and rehabilitation processes, and support for enhanced child justice system through increased linkages with civil society. And our Trinidad and Tobago benefited greatly because the USAID money funded the Children Court Project, an impressive development where child rights are recognized. We cannot say we want to do right by children and not believe children are entitled to rights.
Senator
we must
Thompson,
make the link between
you have 5 more minutes.
Rights and dignity. I have made no secret of my admiration for the Commissioner of Police. I'm impressed with his sincerity of purpose. I know his heart in the right place, but he must work within the rules of international law and child rights. Equally, I say to the chairman of the Children's Authority, who also has my unstinted support, when children's rights are wronged, diplomacy is not an option. A few years ago, I did a distinguished lecture in San Fernando, and I spoke about children being our sacred trust from the Creator and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we fail to understand that non-fulfillment of these needs, including their need for belonging, leads to children joining gangs, so they are becoming violent, then we are in for problems. Father absence creates no end of problems. We must be tough on the causes of crime more than crime itself. We must not let the crime overshadow the child. We know that hurt people, but we still do not have in place a proper law dealing with reporting of child physical abuse, and we need to work on that. We have increased the penalty for cruelty to animals, $100,000 in the Summary Offences Bill. We heard about $200,000 in the Disease and Importation Health and Welfare Act. But under the Children Act, cruelty to children attracts a fine of $5,000 and imprisonment for 6 years. We've ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have not yet set an age for criminal responsibility, so we are still at 7 years of age, even though the Child Rights Committee has told us time and time again that we should increase that age. And in fact, they have set the age of criminal responsibility now at, first it was in 2005, they said at 12 years, now increased to 14 years. What happens between that age, children who are below that age, is that they must be treated as and provided with assistance and services according to their needs. Diversion is an important principle of child justice. Early encounter with the law frequently lead to adult criminality, so keep the children out from the court. We talk about evidence-based practices, but restorative justice has proved successful with child and adult offenders and their victims, and we still have not included restorative practice in our law. John Eckler said, if all young people are secured all the physical, social, and economic rights proclaimed in the convention, the lives of millions of adults of the next generation will be transformed. It would be a grievous mistake to see the convention as applying to childhood alone. Childhood is not an end in itself, but part of the process of forming the adults of the next generation. The convention is for all people. It can influence their entire lives if its aims can be realized. The convention can truly be said to be laying the foundation for a better world. Gabriela Mistral, first Latin American Nobel Prize winner for literature, said, many things we need can wait. The child cannot. Now is the time his bones are formed, his mind developed. To him, we cannot say tomorrow. His name is today. At times, I get tired of waiting for us to do right by children. But do I condemn this government for its failure to effectively deal with the unacceptable and serious crime situation affecting law-abiding citizens? Crime will always be with us. But I do see some progress. I will continue to advocate for better laws and hold government to account where necessary. It is for this reason I took my oath of office and will continue to act without fear or favor. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator De Freitas.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion dealing with crime that is engaging the attention of this august House today. Madam President, I could sum up this motion in 2 words: hypocritical and contradictory. Let me begin by stating that this is the 3rd crime motion brought by the opposition in the last 5 years. The first one was brought by Senator Sturge, the second one was brought by Senator Beaker, and this 3rd one moved by Senator Hussain. The arguments put forward in each and every motion have not changed. They've been the same since 2016. The problem with that is that, as the Attorney General has pointed out, a lot has been done over the 5 years in relation to increasing the number of tools available to the TTPS, increasing the efficiency of the various arms and organs responsible for treating with crime in this country. But if that is the case, and he went into great detail to point that out, then why is it that the argument remains the same? What is hypocritical, Madam President, and contradictory is the fact that Senator Hussain, in moving his motion, Senator Haynes today, and Senator Amin all spoke to, agreed by the independent senators and the speakers thus far on the government bench, that dealing with crime must require a bipartisan approach. But it is only members on the opposite side that, after stating that, begin to get extremely political in their contributions. Senator Amin, as we've just heard, being the most political in that regard. So how could you speak to having a bipartisan approach? And I think Senator Amin, in her contribution, indicated that if you're dealing with crime, then you should take politics out of it, and then goes on in the end of her contribution to get extremely political. And that is why I say, Madam President, this motion and the contributions by members opposite is extremely contradictory. But let me move forward, Madam President,
and just reiterate the points made by the members opposite for the last 3 private members' crime motions brought since 2016. Senator Amin indicated throughout her entire contribution that in relation to the government's attempt to deal with crime, that we only pass legislation without any operationalization. The Attorney General dealt with that. She even went on to say that she couldn't even remember if regulations were passed in relation to the DNA bank. I sat in this chamber. I contributed to that debate. Senator Hussain contributed to that debate. And I distinctly remember that we were treating with the regulations in that legislation, dealing with identification, how you collect the DNA, how you store the DNA, how you pass the DNA along with security measures. All of these things were done. And what was said at the end of that debate, Madam President, was that using DNA in terms of crime fighting was a very good tool that would help with the detection rate. So when Senator Amin stands up to say that she can't even remember, after sitting in this chamber for 5 years, that we dealt with that legislation, but stands up to say that in relation to crime, this government has done nothing, and all we are doing is passing laws with no operationalization, it tells me that this senator does not know what is going on when it comes to dealing with crime. So why speak about bipartisanship? Why speak about this government is doing nothing in relation to crime? If it is that in sitting in this chamber, you are not even listening when key pieces of legislation and regulations are being passed to treat with crime in this country. Madam President, other arguments that I have heard coming from Senator Hussain when he moved his motion are arguments such as we pass laws when in actuality what we need is more courts. Senator Amin spoke to galvanized surrounding an empty lot in San Fernando and saying that there's no construction taking place. Now, everybody in Trinidad and Tobago knows, given the current situation that we're in, we had to shut down construction. The public sector construction and private sector construction was only reopened in phase 2 recently. So Senator Amin, speaking to no construction taking place in San Fernando, knows fully well that there's a good reason why that may be. But I will go on to say this, Madam President. All of us in this chamber are supposed to be submitting our Integrity Commission documents soon. By May 30th, I think the deadline is. And if anybody is going to submit those documents back where we used to sit at the International Waterfront Complex, the first thing they will notice is that the elevators that we used to take are very different. Madam President, they are boarded up. Why are they boarded up? Because the construction has begun on the courts that the Attorney General has spoken to, which would now occupy the chambers that this Senate and the House of Representatives used to occupy. So when Senator Amin and Senator Hussain and Senator Haynes speaks to the fact that we are not putting in more court, that is absolutely incorrect. And when you go to file your documents on level 14 of that International Waterfront Complex, you would realize that work is taking place and those courts are being built. So that argument no longer exists. It may have worked in 2016 when Senator Sturge brought up that crime motion, but it definitely cannot fly or pass in 2020. Madam President, the next argument that comes forward over these 3 private members' motions is that we pass laws when in actuality what we need to do is take action within the system that is set up in Trinidad and Tobago to treat with crime. And they speak specifically to the TTPS needing revamping, and you heard Senator Amin speak to the Forensic Science Center. Now, the Attorney General went through this in great detail. And what I would like to add to what he had said, Madam President, is that anybody looking at the TTPS since the police commissioner was appointed would notice certain subtle changes into the operation of that unit. And some of the things that you would notice, Madam President, is that there's now a rapid response vehicle unit with large cameras on the roof, which is supposed to assist with accountability when dealing with police officers. Madam President, you would also notice that there are badges with IDs for the police officers, which again also assists with accountability when officers deal with citizens, so that citizens can identify the officer if it is that something went awry in terms of that interaction. Madam President, you would also notice since the appointment of the police commissioner that there has been a concerted effort to increase the number of promotion of officers in a timely fashion. And what that does within the TTPS is ensure that the morale of the officers who would have been acting for a large amount of time with no end in sight now can stand up, appointed in the position that they were acting in, and therefore their morale goes up. Madam President, you heard most recently within the last 2 weeks where the Commissioner of Police would have spoken to dealing with the resistance in the police service of rogue officers. All of these things have been done during the 2015 to 2016 period when we decided to appoint a police commissioner because we needed someone in that role who would be able to act confidently instead of having a person in an acting position, which was done under the last administration. Madam President, in relation to the Forensic Science Center and the argument that the Minister of National Security spoke to building a new center, which he did. But Madam President, there's not a person in this country that does not know that the economic climate that we are in right now may not lead us to be able to move forward with that in the way that we want it to. But that does not mean that we cannot engage other activities which would help with the efficiency in the Forensic Science Center. We sat in this chamber last year, and we passed laws to decriminalize cannabis. One of the activities that used to clog up the Forensic Science Center was when you had to process cases dealing with drugs like cannabis, identifying the particular drug so that the case can move forward. And that decriminalization bill that was put forward, Madam President, and subsequently passed, helped to remove a certain amount that usually would have gone to the Forensic Science Center, therefore reducing the caseload in that center and making the efficiency go up in that sense. Madam President, one of the other arguments put forward by Senator Hussain in piloting this motion, he indicated that we need to take steps to deal with domestic violence and its rampant nature in Trinidad and Tobago. And I could understand because when he filed this motion, it was in February. And he may not have known at that point in time that the electronic monitoring legislation was going to come. So now I can make the argument, because we had this debate several weeks ago, that treats specifically with domestic violence cases and ensuring that we do not have the kind of issues which Senator Hussain was referring to. It actually goes a step further to protect domestic violence victims in that bill. Madam President, the Attorney General spoke to what was done in the judiciary to ensure that we have maximum efficiency in terms of disposal of cases. So I will not go into reiterating what the Attorney General said because he spent quite a bit of time in his contribution dealing with that. And I think his arguments were profound, they were sound, and they completely refute that argument put forward by the opposition in that the justice system is slow and will not get any faster. Madam President, as I indicated before, every single speaker today, specifically, spoke to crime requiring a bipartisan approach in order to properly deal with it. And I have to say, what we've seen from members opposite thus far is anything but a bipartisan approach. One hand cannot clap. It will make no sound. How do we know that the opposition is not serious about this bipartisan approach? Madam President, the Attorney General also alluded to this. Just last week, the bail amendment bill, they abstained on it. He spoke to the gaming, gambling, and betting bill, which would have treated with money laundering and corruption, not passed in the House of Representatives. The idea that it's only the government who must deal with crime has been spoken to by Senator Thompson-Aye. Understandably so, the opposition would have you believe that they have no ability to help affect crime in this country. I disagree with that. Because when we pass legislation in this chamber, and the opposition supports that legislation, that is the bipartisan approach to which everybody is speaking to. But I understand when they speak to taking the politics out of crime. So let's take the politics out of crime for a second. Let's look specifically at another avenue by which the opposition can contribute in a setting that is set up specifically to be bipartisan. And that is the Joint Select Committee on National Security, Madam President, which I have been a member of for the last 5 years. And one thing that I have noticed between the previous administration and what is happening now as they are members opposite and form the opposition is that they are incapable of being consistent in any kind of crime plan or approach using any system set up to do so. What do I mean by that? I indicated, Madam President, that we have a Joint Select Committee on National Security. And I would tell you here today that every single government member on that committee has been there for the last 5 years. Every single independent senator on that committee has been there for the last 5 years. There's been no change. We have done the kind of work in the bipartisan approach that that committee is set up to do it in order to effectively help treat with the scourge that it is crime that every single government needs to deal with. Some of the examples of the good work that has been done, Madam President, is the DNA regulations which I spoke to earlier. That was followed up at first on the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Other reports that have come out of that committee is the electronic monitoring bill that was passed was first followed up on that committee until it got to the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have done other reports in terms of investigations into the prevalence of illegal firearms in Trinidad and Tobago. We were instrumental in getting the port scanners turned on at the port of Port of Spain. So when I say that consistency on that Joint Select Committee of National Security,
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
thank you, Madam President, goes a very long way in terms of helping to deal with crime in this country, I know what I'm talking about. Let's look at what the opposition did on that Joint Select Committee of National Security. We started off with Senator Sturge. Didn't make 5 years. We then went to Senator Hussain, who is the mover of this motion, and MP Ramadan was there from the House of Representatives for a while, both of whom were removed eventually from that Joint Select Committee of National Security. Then Senator Ramdeen and MP Munilal came onto the committee, where we all know what happened with Senator Ramdeen, and he eventually left that committee and the Senate. And then Senator Hussain was reappointed. So, Madam President, you see, in terms of any kind of commitment to dealing with crime through a bipartisan approach that the opposition is speaking to that needs to be done, you cannot get it from the opposition. There is no way that they could have any kind of authority to speak to the government on what we are doing about crime when they themselves cannot even put forward a consistent approach by ensuring that senators remain on that committee for 5 years to contribute in a bipartisan manner. So, Madam President, to end, I will say this. This motion, again, is hypocritical. It is contradictory in the way it is being put forward. And what I would say to those listening to my voice in this chamber and out of this chamber is this. The disapproval of cowards is praise to the brave. We will move bravely into the future with vision and execution to the benefit of all citizens, including those that oppose. Madam President, with those few words, I thank you.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm very happy to speak on this private member's motion in the name of Senator Saddam Hussein. And I wish to, from the outset, fully support this motion in which the senator is seeking to have the Senate condemn the government as it relates to its failure to effectively deal with the unacceptable and serious crime situation affecting law-abiding citizens. Madam President, I want to say that crime is extremely serious and has been very, very serious and worsening under this outgoing administration. Madam President, even with COVID and people are being locked down as a result of restrictions, we have a situation where citizens still feel unsafe. Over the last 4.5 years, or 4 years and 8 months, the citizens have become extremely scared. No one feels safe anymore. The government, Madam President, and the citizenry in particular because of crime, the citizenry, that is in a constant state of fear. They have avoided certain areas. They do not venture beyond their homes unless they have basic errands to perform because of the unsafe environment. Madam President, our women feel hopeless and unprotected, even with restraining orders in place. Since the PNM arrived in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly when it won the last election, in inverted commas, in 2015, we have witnessed over 2,200 citizens being murdered under their watch. Since the hapless and clueless Minister of National Security arrived on the compound, that is the current Minister of National Security, we have witnessed over 800 murders in our country. 30 elderly citizens have been murdered last year. Madam President, sexual violence and domestic violence cases have increased to 757 in 2018. Quiet, serene Tobago have seen 7 murders in 2019, 9 in 2018, and 13 in 2017. And the situation, as I said, Madam President, just gets worse. Even under COVID, we have had a lot of murders, or several murders. The papers testify to this reality only today. Madam President, I looked at the contribution of the Honorable Minister of National Security very carefully. I read his contribution. And there are some areas I would like to respond to in his contribution. Madam President, the Minister of National Security, not once, not twice, but on several occasions, but more so in his contribution to this debate, has accused the United National Congress of what he has described as dismantling the facial recognition system at CCTV cameras. In fact, let me recast that. I want to state that according to the minister's statement, and I want to quote, "You want to secure your borders at your 4 international airports? Why did the UNC dismantle the facial recognition?" Now, Madam President, this has been a statement made by the Minister of National Security. I want to state for the public record that I have a media release before me, dated March of 2017, in which, Madam President, that statement has been debunked. It has been debunked, Madam President, by no other person than the former National Security Advisor and National Security Minister between the period 2010 and 2015. I am talking about the current Commissioner of Police, Mr. Gary Griffith. Madam President, I have a media release which was issued in March of 2017, in which it is, and I quote, "I have the world of respect for Minister Young, but I'm obliged to clarify that those comments are totally inaccurate. And I do believe that he may have been misguided by those who were either ignorant of the fact or had their personal agenda to deliberately embarrass Minister Young." And that has to do, Madam President, with a statement made by Minister Young at that time in the Parliament, alluding that the previous PP government was not in communication with our international allies, and also about someone deliberately switching off a security system to pinpoint facial recognition. This statement, as I said, was repeated in the minister's contribution to this debate on the 4th of February 2020. So I wanted, Madam President, to put on the record that it is totally wrong and totally misleading for the Minister of National Security to come to this Parliament and make these wild allegations without any proof, not one shred of evidence. But it goes on the record of the Hansard, which is wrong. Madam President, the minister has always been accusing this government, that is the last government, of not being involved and not being engaged in activities to deal with our borders. And the effort always has been the cancellation of the OPVs by the last administration. And that is being used as an excuse for the porous borders that we currently have, as well as the infiltration of a lot of arms and ammunition into our country. Madam President, I have been advised that this very government was offered 3 OPV-type U.S. Navy vessels at no cost. But to date, this administration has never taken up that offer by the United States. they will have to explain why they have not done so. So I want to make it abundantly clear that it is totally wrong. It is totally based on disinformation and misinformation that the Minister of National Security continues to mislead or misguide, I should say, Madam President, the country by making these false allegations against the last administration. Madam President, I have 9 projects that the government of Trinidad and Tobago between 2010 and 2015 left for implementation by this government. And it is now 4 years and 8 months, and they have rejected these 9 projects. Madam President, one deals with Rudy Giuliani anti-crime proposal. The second one deals with Hannett and Associate. The third is Carrefour. The fourth is something called IR Concilium. The fifth is the New Century Tap-On of the UK project. Then there's a Westminster project, PGI project, a K9 unit project, and a shot spotter project. Madam President, these 9 projects were cancelled or dismantled by this government over the last 4 years and 8 months. So, like my colleague, Senator and friend Nigel De Freitas, Senator Nigel De Freitas, it is highly hypocritical for the government to come here and claim that they have been fighting porous borders. Madam President, there is evidence to show that the government has refused assistance from the United States in an effort to deal with some of the very problems that they come here and accuse the UNC of not engaging. Madam President, I would also like to share with you some information that deals with the whole matter of our helicopters. You know, we read today, or we read recently in the minister's contribution, that the government has been engaged. The last government was engaged, Madam President, in literally not maintaining, and because of the overly expensive helicopters that were purchased, they again attributed blame to the last administration for the failure of the Air Guard and the failure of us not having helicopters in the sky. Madam President, just give me 1 second. I have a document I want to just read. Madam President, I have done some research on this matter, and I have come to the conclusion that this government has literally misled or misguided itself.
Senator Mark, can you not use that?
Or, well, misguided, I beg your pardon, Madam President. Madam President, the reality is that the government has been accusing us.
Senator Mark, you have 5 more minutes.
The government has been accusing us of not being able to address crime in a serious way. I want to tell you today, Madam President, that when the government of the PNM, led by Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, the Prime Minister, came into office, there were 10 helicopters. They met 10 helicopters. Today, Madam President, we only have 2 helicopters. This is the so-called new air unit that the Minister of National Security has spoken to. The government of this regime, the PNM regime, grounded the Air Guard AW139 helicopters on the grounds of its inability to pay for maintenance, Madam President. This resulted in all our airlines and aircrew leaving this country. Madam President, the helicopters, Madam President, were leased, right? And the government clearly cannot meet its obligation. And out of the 4 helicopters owned by the government, NOC division, one of them, Madam President, as I said, is currently grounded. And that one that is grounded, spare parts are being used to ensure that one of the 3 remaining helicopters remain afloat in the skies. So, Madam President, the government has failed to get a proper air guard in the skies to provide the kind of security that is needed in terms of air surveillance. So our entire air surveillance capacity has been destroyed by this government. And that is what has contributed to porous borders, Madam President, the inability to contribute to crime where the TTPS cannot secure them when they are needed as it relates to fighting crime in this country. Madam President, I don't have time this evening to deal with white-collar criminality in this country, which is a very powerful contributor to crime in this land of ours. I don't have the time to deal with it. But the government, for 5 years, have not proclaimed and operationalized the Public Procurement and Public Disposal of Land Act. For 5 years, all they paid was lip service, hypocrisy in opposition, hypocrisy when they were fighting for power. Now they got into power for 5 years, Madam President. There is not a single effort by this government to actually proclaim and operationalize the procurement legislation. Madam President, in closing, I think that a new government must conduct a forensic criminal investigation into the following matters under this government's jurisdiction. The purchase of the 2 ferries from Australia, the purchase of 2 Cape-class patrol vessels from Australia, the lease of 1,146 acres of land to a gentleman who is in charge of General Earth Movers Limited, who is in charge of Marilesa Farms. There should be an investigation into that. Madam President, all of these contracts that have been issued, valued at billions of dollars without proper tendering processes, all of these things ought to be subject to some criminal forensic inquiry. And finally, we need a criminal forensic inquiry into the cancellation of a signed contract valued at $485 million with Chinese Gezabu International Engineering Company and the HDC. Madam President, I don't have the time to continue. I wish to thank you very much, Madam President, for allowing me to make my contribution on this very important motion. Thank you very much.
Singh.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the opportunity to present today. I must say, Madam President, crime should not be used as a tool by politicians for any sort of political gain. And here in arguments, I know we are around election season, and you are hearing allegations from one side to the other side, and sometimes we may not know what is true, what is not true, but you see, the idea is, hearing these allegations, it really does not, seep well for the people who actually deal with the day-to-day crime, deal with the idea of persons in high office, putting blame on each other. And I must say, madam, I look at crime and I see victims of crime. They hurt, they pain in their eyes. Some lives are destroyed forever. I see and I counsel victims. Madam President, I had a patient she was raped at 17 years old, and the family, they have a little parlor. 4 guys came in, they raped this girl in front of her family, and to this day, she has never recovered. Her father was a teacher. He can't work, he's depressed. He feels that he could not defend his family. And the brother joined some bad boys because he figures now that I have to protect my family. I am now with this bad boys sort of gang that could protect me because my father couldn't protect me. And the mother, regrettably, is an alcoholic. So these are the faces of crime I see, the victims of crime. And you see, what is strange, madam, the rapists are walking around free amongst us. And the thing is, we don't know who they are, where they are, because the system has failed them. So when I look at the idea of tackling crime, I have to say the victim has to be foremost in the minds of all politicians. And I have to thank this government for at least choosing a commissioner of police, or giving us a commissioner of police after years. Yes. Our first Prime Minister, Mr. Eric Williams, had his Randall Burrows, who went after guerrillas, who was out in the field. And this commissioner of police actually is in the field, is, amongst the criminals, showing them that he is a strong hand. And sometimes when I see criminals apologizing to him, when they come with these social media, they have social media posing with guns and sending messages to him, and afterwards, they actually apologize. And this is a message we need to send to the youths growing up, that if you say things out of hand, if you play that you're with these criminals, you very well have to apologize or face the penalty. I am certain every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago have either been a victim of crime or knew someone who has been a victim of crime. And this is something we have here that we look at. Even poor businessmen trying to make an honest living. They are targets for criminals for every opportunity. So therefore, Mr. Griffith must be commended for giving businessmen and others the opportunity to protect themselves. He has opened up the field of granting firearm users license. So at least we can say now that persons in the fight for crime can take that fight into their own hands also, not just depending on police, not just depending on government. I have a story where years ago, a doctor actually had a licensed firearm. A guy came into his yard, he shot the guy, a flesh wound. And when the police came, they said, boss, we will have to take away your firearm. But his relatives are going to come for you, and you will be like a sitting duck. Now, he pleaded with the police officer. He said, look, I have 2 daughters, and you're now leaving me defenseless. I have a licensed firearm. But the police said, if you give me 10 grand, I'll let you keep your gun. Those are what happens to some people. They are beat up sometimes by the system. So I'm thinking, Mr. Griffith giving us this, giving persons the opportunity to actually protect themselves. I think we need also here to give the persons the legislation to be able to defend themselves. The so-called castle legislation. My home is my castle. I can defend myself. And you see, a person's abode or any legal occupied place, for example, a vehicle or home, is a place for which a person has protections and immunities permitting them in certain circumstances to use force to defend against an intruder free of legal liabilities. And this includes some circumstances of deadly force. I am thinking it's time the persons who are on the receiving ends, we get this householder defend. It is time we are able to say, well, Mr. Griffith will do what he's doing on the outside, but if you come into my house, I will be able to do what I'm doing with my legal firearm. So we need to free up that sort of legislation to give people more protection. So, Madam President, while I ask for that castle defense to be somehow part of the system now, I am thinking that while this COVID pandemic was dropped unexpectedly in our laps, we were already dealing with a crime epidemic. And we already had startling murder rates, domestic violence, white-collar crimes were the order of the day. And on the 20th of January 2020, the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce issued a media statement where they actually called on the Minister of National Security to acknowledge that we are in a crisis of crime. And this was their statement, we are in a crisis of crime. So they had that knowledge, yeah, it was existing, we had a crisis of crime. But even when I look at the travel advisories, Madam President, from America, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, and how they portray Trinidad, it sometimes brings anger to me and tears to my eyes to say this lovely country is now portrayed in that bad light internationally. So there are persons that from the outside look at us as a nation of persons where crime has gone wild west. And even in Trinidad and Tobago, the amount of crimes and the amount of social media images I see, where people post pictures of images of persons who are victims of crime, it seems that we are desensitized to the murders when someone is killed. It's just a talking point and we go on to it another day. It comes like it's a way of life. Murder, death, it's a way of life in Trinidad. But you see, Madam President, the whole idea of crime and violent crime is one thing. We have to look at the fact that corruption and allegations of corruption, which we have seen leveled here from each side, this has a way of undermining the psyche of the nation also. Because you see, I mentioned before, it's like a ping pong ball. One side hitting the ball of corruption and the other side hits it back, while the whole board is rotting underneath with the neglect of addressing crime. So crime has to be addressed. You see, and it's not just the little black boy, as Senator he mentioned, that it was in Winston Gypsy Peter's Calypso. It is also the individual who drives his Porsche, living on top of the clouds in his penthouse apartment. And while some of us are struggling for a drop of water to drink, we heard the minister talk about the water distribution. While people are struggling for a drop of water to drink, others are having champagne breakfast, mimosa with a $6,000 bottle of champagne drinking, an ace bottle of champagne. So this is the discrepancies that occur in Trinidad and Tobago. You see, years of blaming each other and conditions were allowed to continue. I think if we look at the past, Madam, all the governments had their own corruption, their own allegations of corruption. We had our O'Hallorans, our Privats, we had ministers saying all of we thief. We had our Calder Hart's collateral damage, Danraj Singh, airport fiasco, ex-Prime Minister in jail, the SIS, life sport. All those were corruption allegations or corruptions that exist. We see now contracts made by one regime is cancelled by another regime. They may say, well, okay, we have to get a new contract because the old one were not drawn up properly, or we have to get a new contract because somehow the maintenance part of it was not there. So it's like we have revolving door contracts for the same things over and over coming in. And I ask who gains from that, because you stop a contract, somebody else might be able there to take that gain. Madam President, when I looked at these revolving door contracts, I say we have to implement some way we could stop that. We could stop that because you see, when you hear allegations about an $80 million fence, $300 million warehouse, all these are both sides trying to gain points. But it's really the people, the individual, the ones who cannot get the surface, who cannot get the DNA to get the DNA legislation to work properly. It is those persons who are fighting up in the system, are the ones who suffer. People look on speechless and not knowing what to believe. It's like they are getting battered and abused by the criminals and by successive regimes. So the public really needs something in place to protect us from persons who occupy high office. And Madam, I looked at it and I'm thinking we probably need an anti-corruption commission to deal with any allegations of corruption. An anti-corruption commission where the chair is appointed by Her Excellency, but you have members being members of the procurement legislation, the chair of that legislation, the president, also the chair of the integrity commission, a member of the Transparency International, forensic auditors, Auditor General, IT experts. And if this is set up, any allegation of corruption coming from any side would be investigated and quickly somehow put to rest. So it wouldn't be affecting the nation not having to hear this corruption from side to side every time. So I'm thinking this is something we may need to look at, where all transparent, all contracts be transparent, publish procurement legislation in place. All these, I think, is something that could help in our fight against crime. You see, when someone sees the perception of crime occurring and the perpetrators getting away, there's something called social learning theory. So if I see those in high office getting away with crime, I may think it's good to go into crime. If I see the gang leader able to go into president's house like if he's open arms, I may say, well, I will be a gang leader. You see, what the messages we are sending to the young persons are messages we have to say no more. We have to stop these things. We have to get it right for our young people. You see, targeting those criminals who are seasoned criminals by the brunt of the law, by the legislation that we have gotten from our Attorney General, the slew of legislation, by the police commissioner outside, you have to target the seasoned criminals. But you have to aim now at those coming up, the young child coming up. You see a young child coming up going in a neighborhood. The gang leader is the hero. They provide some of them books and schooling and medicine and help their relatives. We have to know that is a cultural thing. So if we are going to eliminate the gang leaders, we have to put something in place. We have to give them some sort of guidance, some sort of other community leader that they can now look up to, some sort of government program that they can say, I can go in and I can fit in, some sort of mentorship. So they say doctors, lawyers, persons coming out from that area, businessmen who are successful, I can achieve that. I don't just have to look at the gap. So therefore, it seems that we have things in place, MILAT, CCC, pure violence, all those things we have in place. The police youth clubs are essential, and prison youth clubs. But you see, I noticed with our economy, monies were taken away from these bodies. And I'm thinking, with the COVID economy now, I am worried that more monies would be taken away from those functionaries that are doing excellent jobs. Madam, I also look at the fact that the youth offenders in Trinidad and Tobago, it's a high amount of youth offenders. And I've already said before, if you have somebody who is idling, who is not attending school, who is not in a trade, who is not in a family business, who is not doing homeschooling, and you catch them idling, the states that have the authority, we should have legislation in place for idle youth to say, come in, we are going to put you in a boot camp or a youth camp. You have to learn a trade, you have to learn the nationalistic spirit, because you will be out there in the corner, liming with the drug lords, liming with the gangsters. So therefore, yes, gangs are a problem. Gangs has to be somehow eliminated. And you see, when we had the United Nations actually given us some figures when they looked and they said that there were about 100 gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. So even though we are having all the lovely legislation in place from the Attorney General, and he has a dream, and I love it, and I hope it materializes, the day-to-day run-ins, the day-to-day getting things to work is where we may have to look at how we are going to do it. So while we may be having body cameras, we may have officers improving where they have their cameras, dashboard cameras, and the TTPS has goals. The lie detector test will give us confidence into the police service once more. We have to realize that some basic items, sometimes they don't even have air conditioned, toilet paper, and basic things. So we can't be aiming for the stars on one place, and we can't even climb a molehill, anthill. We have to gradually build up. And what I'm looking at is even we mentioned. The police, the army, they were fed macaroni pilau, that was mentioned. So if we don't see about the basic needs, how could we progress up? Yes, we have to progress up, but we have to ensure. And you see, with the economic hard times, I think we are in some trouble. Madam President, I look at the fact that weeding out the bad guys are one thing. Putting them in jail, rehabilitating some of them may not be able to be rehabilitated, and the law will take care of them. But you see, we have to look at other causes of crime. We have to look at the education system.
Senator Dialsing, you have 5 more minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Madam. We have to look at the educational system. There are children in school. You see, a former Minister of Education, Mrs. Manning, had school psychologists. Also, Mr. Tim Gobi Singh, a former Minister of Education, also had special ed teachers looking in schools for children with conduct disorders, children who behave in strange ways, killing animals, have no response to pain, who would go on to be antisocial, what we used to call psychopaths, who represent a portion of the criminal jail system. So we have to look from schools. We have in schools to recognize these children who are being abused at home, who will now take out their anger in crime, recognize them, and we have to look at social services to reach into those homes with love and relation to rescue those children. So those are the future criminals that we have to look at. If you are bullied in school, there's a chance that you will end up committing a crime too. So both ways. So therefore, we have to look at not only social service, education, health, teenage pregnancy. A mother who has to mind a teenage pregnant girl who has to mind a child, she's at disadvantage. We say, okay, you make a mistake, we will teach you, we will empower you, but we will make you stay 2 years with that child, give you some sort of contraception, and put you on your path. We have to rescue the nation. Sports is something that we have to get at, and I am so ashamed about what the fiasco with the live sport, $30 million, that was $400 million, that I thought would have gone, such a good idea, and it's a shame. Even a previous Prime Minister had the idea of having orchestras where you had music, and the culture, culture ministry does play a part in encouraging persons. Yes, you have a culture, but you also have people playing the dabla, the tassa, the sitar, the guitar, the piano, the pan, and those are things that are going to get the future little boy who's going to be a criminal. We are aiming at that. Madam, I'm thinking it's so difficult. If we can't even stop cell phones from going into prisons, how could we stop the porous borders? And we have seen the porous borders up to recently cause a disaster when persons were coming in with a ship. So we are getting it wrong in certain ways. I understand the Attorney General full of energy, and he said, we put in more people in the DPP office, we are putting more judges. But madam, there's something we call in psychology called social loafing. If I'm pulling in tug of war, and I'll give my maximum effort. But if I have 3 people behind me, I wouldn't give that maximum effort. So we may very well have more judges, more magistrates, more personnel, but that concept of social learning is something we have to learn. Poverty eradication, you see, we have to look at that. It's difficult, I know, difficult times. I know now with the economy in such a state, somehow the whole society has to realize we have to downsize our expectations. It's a mental thing that we have to look at. We have to stop, as the Commissioner of Police mentioned, that the regional corporation were also giving out contracts to bandits. We have to stop feeding the enemy. We have to stop those things, and at least, because that again sends a wrong example. Yes, we want to provide jobs for persons, but productive jobs also. Madam President, I must say that the intelligence service, the SWAT intelligence service, good idea. We need those things. We see misuse in the past where a past Chief Justice was monitored, and judges and other persons, but we need something in place. We need something in place where probably an ex-judge could look at that intelligence system to make sure it's not misused. As I continue, Madam, I realize that the gangs are a major issue, and we have to realize that we have to try somehow to attack the gangs, to give them jobs. Some of them we have to rehabilitate them. Some of them we have to realize that due to no fault of ours, that is the only life they knew. They grew up in that culture. Madam, I would like to say that we need to really have a nationalistic attitude to develop our country. We had persons in the past coming in. And as I close, I must say, Madam, that the reports that we have gotten from the United States that actually asks us to, actually mention certain atrocities, certain areas in Trinidad and Tobago that we could try to change, the OSAC reports. And they mentioned a whole set of things problems facing Trinidad and Tobago. But I'm saying drug trafficking and gang-related activities continue to be a major problem here. I'm saying it's time we ask the DEA to come in and set up shop. That may help us with our relationship with the United States, and that may help us solve crime. Thank you, Madam.
Honourable Senators, the sitting will be suspended and we will resume at 4:45 p.m.